So in this video, I'm going to talk about the Powers of X worksheet that I handed out in class, and I'm going to go through the solutions for number 1, and then I'll make different videos for number 2 and 3 and 4 because each of them has a lot of parts. So before we do number 1, I want to take a look at some of the properties of powers that you might not have thought about for a while, but we're going to use them. So especially these first two, a to the negative power and a to a fractional power. And you might think that sometimes you might think that you're always going to go from like a negative power and rewrite it as 1 over something. But in fact, in problem 1, we're going to go the opposite way. We're going to start with 1 over something and we're going to rewrite it as a negative power. And similarly, we're going to start with something that's a root and we're going to rewrite it as a fractional power. And we're going to practice that and sometimes also combine them. Okay, so for number 1, for part A, we have square root of x. And if we look back up here at the property with a b root, so b can be a different number like a cube root or something. But starting from the right, if we look to the left, we should rewrite the root as a power of the form 1 over something. So in part A, we're going to say square root of x equals x to the 1/2. And so it's 1/2 because we had a square root. And so the square goes with the 2 there. Okay, for part B, what I see first when I look at it is 1 over something. And so then I should look at the properties up above. 1 over means that I should rewrite that going from right to left as a negative power. Okay, so if it's 1 over x, that's the same as x to the negative something, and then you look and you ask how many x's are on the bottom, and there's 1 x on the bottom, so this is x to the negative 1. Now that does not include the negative that's out in front. The negative that was out in front is not part of the power, it's not part of the 1 over part, it just goes in front just like it was originally, so negative x to the negative 1. Okay, next up is the cube root, and this works a lot like the square root. So again, you look at the root part, and that part is going to give us a fractional power of x. You ask yourself what should be the power, and you look at the 3, and so because of the 3 there, it should be 1/3 for the power. So again, the 3 on the root gives us the 3 over on the right hand side, but the fact that it is a square root gives us the fractional power. So I'm trying to get this color coding to work there. There's the 3. And actually maybe it's better if I change that power to be the fraction to be 1 over fraction power with corresponding to the square root. Okay, next up we have 1 over x cubed. Again, the first thing I notice is the 1 over part, so this is going to be x to the negative something. And then you say what is the something? It's the 3 on the bottom, which gives us negative 3 power. All right, parts E through G all combine more than one rule. So let me, again, kind of color code the different parts. Part E is 1 over something, and so that's going to give me an x to a negative. What is the 1 over? Well, it's a square root. And that square root becomes a 1/2 power. So that's just like part A again, that 1/2. But now the negative is because of the 1 over that we started with. All right, part F again combines two properties, or two powers I should say, not in the same way as in part E though. So let me start as if I didn't know any properties and I just see that I have a square root, which I know what that should be. It should be stuff to the 1/2 power. And inside the square root, I'm not going to do anything at this step. I'm just going to rewrite exactly what I have inside because I'm not using any properties yet. So that's just the square root getting rewritten. Okay, well now I should go and look at those properties again, and it's one that we haven't used yet. It's this third property, and this says if you have a power on the inside and another one on the outside of some parentheses, then what you should do is you should multiply them together. So that's what we have, and that's what we'll do. We have a power on the inside of 3 and a power on the outside of 1/2, and we should multiply them together. So negative x stays on the inside, but then we multiply and get 3/2 on the outside. Okay, part G, again there are two things that are getting combined here. We have 1 over, and so that will be x to the negative something. And then you look at what's on the bottom, and you say, well, what is this something? It's a -5. So that should be negative x to the negative parentheses -5. And you can probably see that the two negatives cancel. When you have a double negative, they cancel and they leave you something positive. So this is just x to the 5. Now there is another way you can look at this. There's kind of two 1/overs here as well. There's the 1 over that we started with, 1 on top, and then the -5 also means 1 over. So this is 1 over 1 over x to the 5. And if you take that and think about 1 over meaning the same thing as like flip whatever's underneath, like flip a fraction, reverse the top and the bottom, then this should be x to the 5th again. So either way. All right, finally part H. So here I guess actually there's three things combined. There's the 1 over, and then there's a square root, and then there's another 1 over. So I'm going to combine these using algebra, like to combine the powers, or maybe properties of numbers, I guess. So the first one is x to the negative, and then the square root on the bottom gives me a 1/2, so this is x to the negative 1/2. And then the last 1 over x gives me another -1. And then the question is, well, how do I combine those powers? And again, I think we saw in one of the other parts, we should multiply them. So -1/2 times -1 is x to the positive 1/2. Now I should say that you could do this problem in a different order. You could start with the 1 over x that's, after all, it is inside everything else. So here's another way to write it. X to the -1, which is inside of, and then I'll switch colors, inside a square root, and so that would be to the 1/2. And that's inside, or I guess on the bottom of a fraction, which is another -1. There are three powers the way I did it that time, but again I would multiply them all together. So -1 times 1/2 times another -1 gives us x to the 1/2. Okay, so there you have it. That's all the parts, and I'll stop this video and I'll start the next one.